There we go. All right, hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale the Real Seeker, and let me just take the overlay off so you can see us. I forgot to do that. Where are you? There you are. All right, there we are. We're here. Today we have a special guest. We're doing a show with Marvin Wallace. Hey, Marvin, welcome back. Oh,
Marvin is muted.
you're muted, Marvin. Maybe he just doesn't want to talk to me. I don't.
Yep, there you go.
Hey,
Thanks for having me.
awesome. What have you been up to since the last time? When was the last time you were on the show? Do you remember what the show was about there? Or?
Yeah, it will come back to me in a minute. We talked about the last show I did was with David Russell. We were with David Johnson, and we talked about, I think, mental health. Previously to that, the last show that we did together, Dale, was I think when I can't remember if it was when I had the pleasure of being on with Michael Behe or Lydia McGraw.
Oh yeah, it was probably Liddy McGrew because we did her. I know we did her afterwards after Michael.
Okay.
Awesome, awesome. Well,
It
welcome
was
back.
Lydia. Yeah, they were both very informative, fantastic shows.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, and I think today is going to be the same. We've got various kind of social or Christian practical living type topics. You know, things from abortion to euthanasia to transgender stuff. So got a lot of good stuff there. But just before we get into that, I want to introduce you to the co-host, David Russell. Hey, David.
Hey, what's up, buddy? It's good to be here.
Awesome, awesome. What have you been up to? Just to let the audience know on Faith Unaltered.
Oh yeah, man. We just had a great show on icons last night. I was really happy. I learned a lot and provided some pushback. I have my own concerns about it. I have sympathies towards the icon class, which I think they were given that name against their will. But they struggled with it, and I struggle with it, and I wanted to hear more about it. So I listened to the other side last night, the pro icon people, and they did present some good stuff that makes you think and want to question more, and then we've got your debate coming up next week with Jordan,
That's right.
which I'm excited for, on the shroud. But yeah, other than that, the home life's pretty good. Me and the wife are making some Sangiovese rosé. It's an Italian blend of Sangiovese and Pinot Grigio from Italy. And yeah, that was our spare time and fun. And we have a 10-year anniversary coming up on the 2nd of March. So we're looking for a bed and breakfast in wine country to be able to explore that in Virginia.
Are you Marvin? Are you a wine drinker? You should get David to send you some of his wine. He's been shipping
I
it
am
all.
I am a wine drinker.
Oh, David,
Nice.
there you go.
Nice, nice. I don't know if I could send it to him in Hong Kong. I don't know how that works.
Just put it in the ocean, and then about 100 years.
Yeah, with a little message for Marvin.
The American wines I've had have been really good, especially the Californian Napa Valley ones.
Oh yeah, they're very pristine. The place I go to, we have a little local winery here in Virginia that the guy teaches people how to make their own. And his wines are fabulous. I mean, he wins gold medals. Matter of fact, Virginia competitions, 70% of winners in Virginia are from his winery.
Okay, cool.
His students win. So yeah, I mean, it's a very, very awesome thing.
Awesome, awesome. All right, cool. Well, with that said, let's get into today's topics. And the first topic that I want to discuss with you here, Marvin and David, is the issue of abortion. It's a hot topic these days. Yeah, Marvin, what are your thoughts? Do you think abortion is ethical? Should we be slaughtering these babies in the womb, or what?
Well, I think I agree with you the way you phrased the question.
Awesome. Here again. What's
Okay, should we be slaughtering these babies in the womb? Well, I think my view is that once conceived, a human a baby is a human being with potential, and I think that ending that potential is unethical. Are you still there?
Yep. Just listening. All right.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I think that that's unethical. So for me, it's rooted in the metaphysical fact of what a person is. A person is a human being, is a human with potential, and if we allow the potential to unfold, they become a person. And it's also rooted in the scientific fact that a person is, once an egg is fertilized, is a person, or has the potential to become a person. So that's when life scientifically arises and philosophically arises for me. So I think it's unethical to terminate life.
Out of curiosity, would you equate, because you kind of said it is either a person or it has the potential to be a person. For me, I kind of equate the soul and personhood. So if the soul
Oh,
comes in at conception, it's a person kind of thing. But yeah, what are your
I,
thoughts?
I would agree with that. I think that's probably sharper phrasing than I used. Yeah, I think a person has potential. And when I say has potential, I mean has a set of capacities that can unfold in such a way that they become a living entity with relationships and the other capacities that humans have.
Awesome. All right, David.
That's
Go
what
ahead.
I mean by potential. By potential, I mean a human has innate capacities that grow and unfold to the point where they become, adults and wizened individuals. But we let those unfold.
Okay. All right. Well, I have some follow up questions, but first, I want to
Yeah,
get
please,
David in
please.
here. What's your take on abortion? Is it ethical, or what is your take?
Oh, absolutely not. I'm definitely a pro-life advocate, but I wanted to just add my nuance in there. I think conception. I take the conception route versus fertilization, because I believe that it's part of the process of conception. I think that human development starts at conception because I think that once the egg is fertilized, it does remain in that state and needs to drop. The egg needs to drop. So when that egg drops and uh, becomes part of that uterine wall, that's when it becomes conceived, right? So I would say that's part of conception. That's why uh, I don't have a problem with something like the Plan B, um, where it stops conception. Um, so I wouldn't be too harsh with people that take a Plan B. But I do think scientifically, and in the embryology books that I have read, that human development does start at conception. So I would be definitely in agreement with Marvin, where uh, with potential, the idea of potential, let's say, and that when an egg drops, human development, I would use, instead of just potential, I would use human development. Right. So I think human development actually starts at conception. And I think that's the scientific consensus at this present time. So that's kind of where I would go.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, Marvin, what's your take on what David just said there, if you don't mind me asking? Because I haven't heard any Christians kind of give that nuance before. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, well, I mean, when I do think that I use fertilization because it takes, in my opinion, it takes into account fertility treatments for individuals. Perhaps there could be problems with getting pregnant, with, and that could only be done in sort of in vitro fertilization technology. So I think allowing those couples, married couples, to um, use that technology and use fertilization is a, a good use of technology, which I think is ethical. So that's how I arrived at that.
gotcha. One thing I'm curious about here to ask. Um, so I'm wondering, do you think that we have any like biblical warrant? So we're saying we think the soul comes in either at conception or at the moment of fertilization, but how do we know that? Like, is there any biblical warrant in your view for that? Or oh, did I stump you? Or
Is that the question to me?
yeah, we'll start with you, Marvin. I'll ask you
Okay.
as well.
Yeah. So your question is, at what point does the soul come to the individual to make them a person?
Well, how do we know? How do we know that that's the point, kind of thing? Is there like a biblical warrant, or is it a scientific reason?
Well, I think there's the phrase, before I knit you in your mother's womb, I knew you. So that indicates to us that a person is a person before, or becomes an ensouled person at the moment of fertilization. I think that is the biblical warrant.
All right, awesome. And David, same question to you. Do you think there's biblical warrant for your opinion, or is it based on just scientific knowledge? Or
Well, it's both, right? So I think that, like Marvin was describing, like in vitro technology and stuff, which I obviously support. Um, and I think that even with in vitro, you lose a lot of eggs, right? A lot of fertilized
You do,
eggs,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And the only time that the the egg is actually uh um uh becomes a baby, basically, is when it drops and is knit into the uterine wall, or is conceived. And I think that that's the biblical model, is conception, right? So I think conception just has a process where Marvin would probably start just a little bit before mine, which I'm not technically against. But I really do think that we have biblical warrant as well when the Bible talks about, conception and stuff.
I think Job 3:3 also indicates that the person who eventually grows into an adult is the same person who is in view in the womb.
Right. I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
That's another scripture to give biblical warrant for when a person is.
Awesome.
I think
Awesome.
Psalm 139:16 is another one. Your eyes saw my unformed body.
Yeah,
No,
that's right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, cool. One thing I should ask here, I'm just kind of interested in. I think there's some philosopher, William Hasker, I think is his name. Are you guys? I'm not sure. Are you guys familiar with Hasker
yeah,
there?
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Some of
he's
them.
a
Yeah.
metaphysician. Can't remember where he has. Is he just retired? But I know him anyway.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And he kind of goes for this view of emergentism, right? So he's kind of got this view that is more consistent with atheists and stuff that
Mhm.
says, well, the soul emerges once the brain or the body, the fetus develops to a certain point. And on that, well, what's the point? He'd be more in line with atheists. I just, yeah, wondering, like, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Yeah,
I think if his view was in line with scripture, it would be a very good one. But I don't think it is. In my opinion, conception is the start of life as we can understand it in the Bible.
Yeah, I agree too. I think that the science is pretty much uh I mean, it's settled. It's been settled that human development, is starts at conception.
awesome. All right,
So yeah, I
cool.
would disagree with him on that. I don't think I don't yeah, I don't I understand where he's coming from because it's a very philosophical idea, but
Mm.
I don't think that that's correct as far as biblically, and I think scientifically as well.
Awesome. All right, cool. All
We
right.
can also remember Luke 1:41 to 44 as well, um, in which in the New Testament, in which a baby is considered to have identity from being in the womb. Luke 1:41 till 44.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. All right, cool. Yeah, I was look. It's kind of what you guys are talking about here. It does remind me of Harry Stark. I posted up a video where he did it on abortion, and he just basically destroys it with scholarly scientific consensus that look on the basis human life, and that's equated to the soul that takes place at this moment of fertilization, and every scientist in the world agrees with that. So yeah, I think it's kind of my own opinion on abortion is that it's straightforward. It is obvious. We should not be. We are killing a human being if we engage in an abortion um, right from the moment of conception and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's my own view. All right, cool. Are anything else on abortion that you wanted to say, Marvin, before we move on to, or David, before we move on?
I mean, I
Uh,
have some stuff,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
go
Please,
ahead,
Dave,
Marvin.
go
Oh,
ahead.
okay.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, I really like the notion of sled that um I can't remember his name right off the top of my head. It's like right on the tip of my tongue, but he uses the analogy sled, and I think that once a human is conceived, rights apply to them, and as a consistent Christian, I don't think I can discriminate against somebody because of their size, their location, their environment, or development stage. If I apply those, I have to apply those consistently to other people when it comes to how I treat other people. Right. So when I look at those four criteria, um, I have to be consistent across the board philosophically. And abortion doesn't allow me to be that consistent because I have to start redefining life and
Mhm.
redefining where that comes from, you know. So where yes, scripture is my ultimate authority and science actually lines up with the scripture, I think that that's a beautiful thing, and I think it solidifies where life comes from. It solidifies where it begins. You know, that we have these two major beacons of knowledge. And yes, I say the Bible's a beacon of knowledge. And science that tell us, hey, look, life begins at conception. At that point, we have to apply um, the same rights and value that we give other humans, right? So when I look at that, I really have to be consistent in that. Otherwise, you know, I, I'm I have no foundation, right? So when I look at exceptions to that rule, which when people ask me about rape and stuff like that, I say, well, you know, um, all the studies point that only 3% get pregnant out of rape, right? I don't think we can create a law where we can discriminate against somebody because of another crime that occurred to somebody else, right?
Mhm.
I know it might sound insensitive, but there are other exceptions, such as um, what is it? Oh man, fallopian tube pregnancies, right? Where the egg doesn't drop, it actually
Topic,
attaches.
ectopic.
Yeah, ectopic pregnancies. And at that point, what we're doing is we're not. There's not a murder going on. There's not an abortion going on, right? There's actually a doctor that has to save a life, and by removing the other life, and I haven't seen very good there's a lot with people try to do this notion of 6 embryos in a fire versus an infant, right? And they try to use this false dichotomy or this false thought experiments of who you're going to save. Are you going to save the 6 embryos or are you going to save the infant? And everybody picks the infant, right? And there's a
Yeah.
reason for that. We're not, you know, we may have the reasons uh, why we do pick the infant. However, it doesn't negate the fact that there are other 6 lives lost, and we got to
Mhm.
keep that in mind that that's actually a false um, thought experiment. It's not very good. It's a false dilemma, right? Because we're not saying that the loss of life is tragic, you know, but what we're saying is that we have other reasons of why we would pick the infant. And I just want to bring those out because that's a lot of those arguments are there. And I think my reform brothers who do this street ministry and that are presuppositionalists actually do a good job at breaking down the entire abortion mind frame, you know, the worldview that comes with it. And they're very good at showing the inconsistencies that is wrought with people that are pro-choice.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Good, good, good. Well, you were going to say something about fertility treatments in so far as embryos can be deep frozen and left to rot basically in fertility clinics. Were you going to comment on that, David?
Oh no, I didn't I didn't hear that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that's that's very
You
very
touched
that's not a good thing either.
you touched on it because
Yeah.
I mentioned about fertility treatments, and I think one of the things they do to kind of mitigate the expenses, they fertilize. I think in batches of I can't remember 5 or 10. I can't quite remember at the moment, and it can rather than take the eggs from the women sort of over a period of months. They try to do it in a shortened time frame, which means they end up with I'm not sure I got that part quite accurately, but basically they fertilize the eggs, more than one egg at a time, to maximize the chances of a viable pregnancy. But it can end up with say 3 fertilizations. Well, what do you do then? You implant one into the surrogate or into the mother. Surrogacy is another issue, and then you have two fertilized eggs then, which basically they're aborted.
One thing, oh, David, go ahead. You can go ahead and respond to that.
No, I didn't. No, I hear what he's saying. The whole process is very interesting, and some people get fertilized eggs that are years old, right? So
Right.
I think that's pretty amazing feat of technology where you basically having a 20-year-old child
Yeah.
was conceived, fertilized like that long ago. But is conception at that point? Is conception at that point when the egg drops versus fertilization? That's kind of why I go off the notion of conception as it being as being when the egg drops. I think that's when human development actually starts. So
one thing, I'd like to do, if you guys are good to go, there's an interesting. I mentioned the video. It's a 6-minute video by Harry Stark. I think it's very well done for like a short video on the topic of abortion. Would you guys mind if I kind of played that and have you guys give your take on it? There's
No, it's
something.
okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Play.
All right. All right. Let me bring that
Play
up.
away.
Play away. Is that what you say? All right. Are you guys seeing that? You guys can see that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You might have heard the claim that the human fetus is not alive. But is that really true? In this presentation, we will evaluate whether or not the human fetus is alive using critical examination. One argument put forth is that the fetus is not alive biologically. It is just a clump of cells. This argument is false. The scholarly consensus among scientists is that life begins at conception. According to the professor of anatomy, Keith Moore, quote, human life begins at fertilization, end of quote. According to the scientist Yuki Akata, quote, the life cycle of mammals begins when a sperm enters an egg, end of quote. According to Van Nostrand's Scientific Encyclopedia, quote, at the moment the sperm cell of the human male meets the ovum of the female, a new life has begun, end of quote. According to the obstetricians J.P. Greenhill and E.A. Friedman, quote, the term conception refers to the union of the male and female pronuclear elements from which a new living being develops, end of quote. According to the embryologist Jan Langman, quote, the development of a human being begins with fertilization, end of quote. Another argument put forth is that the human fetus is not a person, even if it is biologically alive. This argument is false because none of the alternative definitions of human personhood can be consistently applied. We will now evaluate each attempted definition of human personhood. One attempted definition of human personhood is when a human achieves consciousness. This definition fails because humans in comas still have personhood, even though they're unconscious. Newborn babies are still persons, even though they're unconscious. Another attempted definition of human personhood is viability and independence. This definition fails because handicapped humans still have personhood, even though they are dependent upon others. Newborn and prematurely born babies are still persons, even though they are dependent on parents or the incubator, respectively. Another attempted definition of human personhood is via the genetic code with chromosome pairs of the species Homo sapiens. This definition works because it is the only definition that successfully encompasses all human beings. It is also the only definition that makes a major and clear distinction between that which exists before that moment and after that moment. Before conception, there is no actualized potential. After conception, there is an actualized natural potential and purpose to become a fully functioning, sentient human being. This means that the fetus, regardless of its stage, must be treated as a human person with rights. Another argument put forth is that the woman has bodily autonomy over the human fetus inside of her. This argument is false. Firstly, a parent has an legal obligation to take care of a living child, or else the parent will get charged with neglect. Secondly, it is illegal for citizens to end human life in domestic settings. Thirdly, the offspring in the womb also has Another argument put forth is that abortion should be for economic reasons. This argument is false. To use an analogy, is it permitted to drown a newborn baby because the parent is unable to take care of her? No, of course not. Since the newborn baby is alive, the parent or the state is obligated to take care of her. Likewise, since the human fetus is alive and is a person as well, the parent or the state should be obligated to take care of her as well. Another argument put forth is that abortion limitations infringe upon women's rights. This argument is false. Abortion hurts women's rights because it kills the female in the womb. Abortion is not a human right. Abortion being a human right is a commercially motivated lie. The right to life is a part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. By protecting the life of the female in the womb and being pro-life, we are supporting women's rights and we are making the world a better place for girls everywhere. Being pro-life is the most feminist thing you can do.
All right. So I'm gonna stop it there. You guys kind of get the point, but yeah, I want to throw it over to you guys. There's a couple things in that video that I want to ask you guys about, but before I do that, I just want to turn it to you guys. Marvin, starting with you, was there anything in that video that kind of caught your eye that you'd like to? What's your take on the video?
Yeah, the video is pretty sound. Basically, it's the same position that I take, which is an Aristotelian metaphysic about what a person is. A person is a human substance with innate human capacities that have the potential to be actualized. Once they're actualized, we become mature individuals. So that is exactly the position that I take.
Gotcha. And David, just kind of general thoughts on that video before I go to the couple issues I want to ask you guys about.
Yeah, I look at conception as I've stated before as like a three-stage process, right? So, I'm up to the 48-hour mark plus the 24 hours of fertilization, 12 to 24, right? So I think that all the whole process of conception exists in 3 stages, and you'll find this on other medical things. I mean, the reason why I say fertilization alone doesn't truly cut it, because I don't know how that first cell division actually truly works right now. I know there's some notions of it that are different, but I when I look at over 50% of those fertilized eggs actually never they lose them, right? But that one is actually conceived in the womb. That's when I think the whole process is solidified and started. So that'd probably be the only difference I have, is I look at conception as a 3-stage process.
All right, awesome. All right, so the things I wanted to ask you guys about. So obviously, the main objection, mainstream objection to this pro-life position that all 3 of us take, but he brought up this issue of autonomy or bodily autonomy, and look, there's a moral principle of autonomy. So that people might question, well, why is the principle of upholding life or life preservation more important than the woman's autonomy over her own body? Some people might say, look, my bodily autonomy is more important than someone's life, than my uh, unborn baby's life. How would you guys kind of interact with someone who thinks that way? Because it's basically a values difference, right? They value autonomy over
Yeah,
life.
I mean, the way I look at it is this: if a couple sort of had a baby and then left the baby and went on holiday, they'd be charged. They'd be charged for not looking after the infant, and I just think that a fetus is a person in the same way, and we as a society need to ensure the well-being of that individual, even if the parent is not willing to shoulder that, the biological parent is not willing to shoulder that responsibility. So it should go to term, and then it should be fostered out or adopted out or looked after in some way. That's a, so the idea of autonomy is kind of irrelevant in this debate. I feel.
Gotcha. Yeah, David.
Yeah, well, you to to save somebody's autonomy, you end up having to violate another person's autonomy, and that's where I think the problem comes in, right? I mean, we're violating another person's autonomy without their consent, and that's a problem as well. We all know how babies get here. I mean, it's not a hard
Right.
thing, and there has to be responsibility in that aspect as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of arguments that pro-life position has successfully given in defense of that. So that's kind of how I tackle it. I tackle it with, the violation of another person's autonomy, and responsibility of the people that engage in sexual intercourse, you know. So yeah.
All right, cool. So, last question on this abortion topic, and then I think we can move on to the next one. But I've found that there's been a lot of discussion, kind of the focus in philosophy and scholarships, for some reason, as of late, has kind of more shifted away from the morality of abortion, like the question autonomy versus the moral principle of life preservation. And it's more focusing about rights language instead of morality language. The woman's rights and stuff like that. I'm just kind of have you guys noticed this kind of shift to it more rather than focusing on the morality or
Well,
ethics?
yeah, Dale, I have. Yeah, absolutely. I have seen it because they can't justify it scientifically anymore. They're taking a life, so they have to redefine where life begins or the constitutionality of when the person becomes a person with rights. And I think that's an atrocious way to look at it. And however, I mean, it's just an argument that to me has just gotten weaker. So that's kind of like where I look at it is okay, well, you know you could be violating another person's rights by getting rid of them. I mean, that's obviously the result of that argument is you are messing up here. You're violating one person's rights to life because of you want to put your rights before them, but there's that whole responsibility factor, and there's all sorts of things that go into that.
Gotcha. Yeah, Marvin, what have you noticed this kind of trend primarily focusing on legal rights, and what's your take? Is that good or bad?
Um. Well, like David, I think that the conversation has shifted because perhaps there's less the scientific evidence points strongly against the naturalist position that many sort of pro-abortionists take. One thing that is one example of how the conversation has shifted is that there has been a big movement for pro-abortionists arguing that it's the fetus's ability to form meaningful relationships that give it personhood. It is at that point that the person is a human being. Before that, then it's just a clump of cells.
Yeah.
So that is a movement that gained a lot of traction and also a lot of notoriety, especially from a paper that was written by Francesca Minerva and Alberto Giobellini in the Journal of Medical Ethics in 2013, because in effect they were arguing for sort of what they call, I think the paper was called after birth abortion.
Oh yeah, that was horrendous. I read
Yeah,
that. It was a 2012
yeah,
article, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically,
Why Let the Baby Live was the
hey,
subtitle.
that was it
Yep.
called? Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
that was the
after
title.
birth abortion, why let the baby live?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I also just on the consistency thing, Dale. Uh, any person that tries to put their rights on the line here and to be like, oh, this is about rights. Well, in fact, they have to live with the result of discriminating against another person due to their size, their location, their environment, or their stage of development. They still have to live with that inconsistency, saying, oh, well, I promote my rights here, but I'm willing to take away this person's rights based on their development stage, and that's, to me, that's a very inconsistent way to look at law and rights and so forth. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Hmm.
Absolutely. All right, cool. Well, I want to kind of change gears here because it's a related question. But Marvin, you wanted me to ask you, look, the issue of euthanasia. Okay, so now we're born. The person's born. That they're kind of making their own choice. They want to die because of whatever reason. Obviously, in Canada, we this is enshrined in law. Yeah, euthanasia is now legal in Canada. What's your take on that from a Christian perspective? Is euthanasia ethical or moral?
I think euthanasia is not ethical, um, because it's actually doing the same as abortion in reverse. It's killing somebody at the end of life, right? Euthanasia is basically putting somebody to sleep for good. Um, I think the propensity for it to go wrong and be misused far outweigh. I don't know if they far outweigh, but should cause us to have serious uh, thoughts about whether we should do this kind of treatment or lack of treatment. I don't know if you could say it's treatment because it kind of runs against the Hippocratic Oath.
All right, awesome. And David, what are your thoughts on euthanasia there?
I have a problem when any federal body or state body would get involved in a process like that. To me, that screams the Third Reich, right? I mean, it's just not something the state has any business getting involved with. I have sympathies for people that are in great suffering that want to end their lives. I mean, I can't push that aside because I know what my grandfather went through. He went through a series of heart attacks and strokes at one time. Was one in 13 million to live through the first 2 months, and then another one in 326 million to live over 20 years in his condition. He was an invalid and uh, very hard life. And I looked at that and I've told myself over and over again, if I had to go through that, would I want to commit suicide? Which I think suicide is a little bit different on that aspect. I still don't think it's the Christian response, right? However, people do it. And I can't, it's kind of like I don't want to. I don't promote it because I
Mhm.
believe that life is the most precious thing in the world. But I can understand why they would want to exit, because it's a horrible condition to live with. You're having strokes almost every day. My grandfather had many strokes
Oh dear.
all day. throughout the day, throughout his life. Some days would be better than others, but those mini strokes were still there, you know. He tried to end his life when he wasn't thinking. He failed, you know, and he did it when I was with him. I was asleep on the couch, and you know, he got up in his walker and went in there and tried to do some stuff. I had to call my grandmother to come back home, and she lit into him about being a Christian man, and he was apologized and repented. And but the fact is sometimes we go into an altered state of mind where we're not thinking about those things because we have this imbalance, we have this lapse of clear thoughts. That's why, you know, we have to be in the right frame of mind to stand trial, all sorts of things that come into this process. However, that's where my sympathy is with those that have terminal cases, that do commit suicide, and we use that to try to allow the state to get involved to put us to sleep, like Marvin said. And I think that's where the huge problem, and that's why there's a difference between euthanasia versus suicide, right? I
Yeah,
truly think that is. But the idea of a state and local body getting involved, like I said, it screams Third Reich, it screams Margaret Singer, it screams of the abuses that went out during those early years in the 20s and the 30s, where you know, people would get sterilized. I mean, good gosh, I mean, think about the Native American population that where they were performing uh what is it, they're sterilizing women, you know, by giving them hysterectomies at an early age. You know, I mean, gosh, man, this is what comes out of ideas of euthanasia, you know? Um, and that's scary. That's a scary thing. It's wrong. And I would be against it on every level, especially when you start crossing those lines.
Okay, and just to clarify, David, so like obviously you have these problems of abuse and stuff like that, but in principle, let's pretend the person is in the right state of mind and they're just going through this painful suffering and stuff like that. In principle, if everything was ideal, would you be in favor of
Well,
then? Or?
no, because the person going through that amount of suffering isn't ideal. There is no ideal at that point. Um, Somebody in the right mind, as a Christian, understands suffering, and we understand why we go through it. And it is incumbent upon us to reserve every second of life that we can to participate in that kingdom of God and get people saved. um you know, and be an example for Christ even in our sufferings, you know, because his grace is sufficient. But where there is no ideal, Dale, there is no ideal situation where that's okay.
Gotcha.
I think
Okay. What,
I think that
It's
I think
unideal is why it would happen.
I think I would like to interject here as well at this point to just try to add something. So there's physician assisted suicide in which you could say, or assisted suicide in which you could say the person is helped, perhaps given drugs by somebody who wants to help them sort of end it all. There's also euthanasia, in which case the person is incapacitated and is euthanized. And there's also another option. When I say another option, there's another sort of scenario which is withholding treatment. I think in certain situations, as you have described with your grandfather, it seems to me that the prognosis was terminal. Maybe let's not talk about your grandfather. I don't want to sort of say anything that may be emotional for you. But there could be a situation, for example, in which somebody has a terminal illness. Now, through the use of medication, you can mitigate the effects of the pain and suffering, you know, by prescribing drugs. prescribing medication, but you can withhold treatment that would prolong their lives. So in that sense, you're not actually euthanizing them. They're dying from the illness that they have. I would say that that's ethical.
I would say that to there's an extent to where that's ethical, right? There's a
Mhm.
degree to where that's ethical,
Yeah.
right? But when you start allowing like there's the DNAs, right? Do not resuscitate. I think that's ethical, right?
Okay.
Because they're actually already gone, right? They don't need to, they just don't want to be resuscitated because that illness is just going to do it again, right? So I think there's lines where that is acceptable, and I would like to differentiate that because I don't think all the time that is the case because my grandfather, because of medication, got to see his grandson graduate. He got to see his granddaughters graduate in that condition. He lived 25 years in that condition. And, I learned a lot about who he was. And I got to have a relationship with him that I wouldn't have had if those medications and he did commit suicide or was euthanized um, or withheld treatment. It just there are situations where that is acceptable, like you said, Marvin, and there's degrees where that's not. And that's why it scares me when a state local body would allow uh these type of things to happen when a doctor's main purpose is to preserve life. you
Right.
know so I would say, don't put laws in effect for any physician to be able to assist in that. It's almost like committing Harry Carey.
Mhm.
You're sitting there and the guy asks you to help him cut off his head at the end when after he stabs
Right.
himself. I mean, it's just it does not comport to me, and I think it's wrong to certain degrees. But I do hear what you're saying, Marvin, and I think we'd have to justify those degrees.
One thing, well, go ahead, Marvin. I have a couple questions after, but
I was
yeah,
gonna, I was just going to say the scenario, I think in Holland, and it's played out in other places as well, is that in times of suffering, people have signed forms for euthanasia. And then in sort of times of less suffering, they've wanted to rescind previous statement, but have previous commitments, but have been denied that. And the state has actually sort of gone through with their euthanasia, even though they've expressed a change of heart. That's one of the problems. A second problem is a second problem is there's nothing to stop collusion between sort of relatives who have financial gain or material gain and doctors, right? Nobody would know.
Yeah, I hear you there.
There's a third problem that I was going to throw out as well is that sort of governing authorities, for example, in Holland, if they have to balance the books, then euthanasia numbers tend to be increased that month. That's a sort of another problem that
Yeah,
arises. Yeah,
it's a huge. Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. And that's the problem of getting the state involved. People are upset because they were denied this certain uh um exiting treatment. And to me
Mhm,
it's like, well, yeah, you're denied it. They're not there to provide you with death.
mhm,
They're not there to provide that. That's not their function.
mhm,
So you could be mad all you want. Almost, it's kind of I get this unsympathetic uh, notion. Just jump off a cliff, then. I don't know. I don't know what if you're that dead set on ending your life, and I do understand suffering and stuff like that, but like it's not for the state to get involved with. And
mhm,
like you said, the other problems that do arise, those numbers, that's a scary thing.
mhm.
Those numbers go up. the euthanasia numbers go up when there's a quota that's not, you know, or there's a reason it needs to go up.
Yeah,
for
you
the
could
state.
imagine. You could imagine a scenario when, in which, for example, a hospital has a certain budget and it needs a certain medicine. Right, the medicine's expensive. How do they buy more of that medicine? Well, if they end treatment of certain patients whose prognosis is terminal, they can save the money there and put it into into buying medicine. Right, so that's the danger there, and there's sort of, I don't know if there's direct evidence, but there's certainly arguments been made that
and
have been
and
made.
Well, and
Dave,
that's a problem. That's a problem with a healthcare system that is purely run by a government entity,
Mhm.
and there's no sort of other avenues, right? That would allow for, let's say, a private industry or another company to be able to provide that medication at a cost to where they could then turn around and uh, uh, give or research other life-giving drugs and stuff like that. I think it's a problem when when the government has sole control of that healthcare system.
Mhm.
all right. All right, cool. So I have some follow up questions. So like one thing I wanted to ask you guys is you made this distinction between euthanasia and suicide. So I just wanted to like what is the difference? If obviously you guys don't go for it, but you know, let's say someone did kind of say, yeah, euthanasia is fine if you're going through, you have a terminal illness and you're in physical pain. Okay, I can get on board with euthanasia, but yet suicide, no, you're going through emotional turmoil or spiritual suffering and stuff like that. um, what's the difference? Why couldn't someone end their life with emotional or spiritual suffering as well? What's the difference, I guess, is my question.
Could you say that again? Why couldn't somebody end it with what? With a
uh,
spiritual?
yeah, like
Do you mean
commit
why?
suicide, like they're depressed or
Well,
something.
I think in Belgium it has happened, and I think it happened to something like a young girl who was 13 or 14, who said she was depressed and her life was unbearable.
Gotcha.
She was euthanized. I don't think she was 16. Somebody might have to search that up, but yeah, it's been done.
But
Yeah,
what's wrong with
it,
it though? Like, I'm assuming you think it's wrong, right? Like,
of course. Yeah, of course it's wrong. I mean,
So,
is it
so,
depression is something that comes and goes. We all know that.
mhm.
Um, Life is unbearable at 16 years old, and you're able. Yeah, that's the problem when the state gets involved. Now you're you killed a child that hasn't even known what life is truly about. Their brains haven't even been fully developed. I mean, there's so many things that we could cite that's wrong with that. Versus somebody that took their life in their own hands and did it. And even in most places, in a lot of places, suicide is actually against the law. We try to get you help if you fail at an attempt in suicide, which is the right response. But to be able to not and get that person the help they need is to me is wrong, as well. you know
gotcha. All right, cool. So it's kind of this lack of it's the fact that there's hope, right? It's not quote unquote terminal in the same way. That's an
yeah,
essential
of
difference
course.
for you.
Yeah, I
One thing.
mean, yeah, there's nothing there that is, like you said, is terminal. So I mean, I don't see where any situation where that is a viable option is to uh euthanize somebody for depression or get them the help they need. Spend your dollars into that.
Okay. Okay. So two more questions, and the next question is actually going to be one of Marvin's questions, but it's related here. Um, okay, great. So we have this very strong as Christians. We have this very strong principle of life where suicide is immoral, even euthanasia is immoral in at very least in the vast majority of cases, kind of thing. So life is there's the sanctity of life principle is what I'm trying to say here. But how does this is a weird question? What about or sorry, no. What about capital punishment then? Sometimes in the Bible, capital punishment it is permissible to take a life for certain goods to come about or to prevent certain harms from coming about. So, yeah, what Marvin? What's your take on capital punishment then?
Well, I come from Britain and we don't have capital punishment.
Neither does
Very
Canada.
very controversial issue. Been recently debated, and I think the general British public just say this. I think the last person who was executed in England was executed by a mistake or was innocent. You can't go back on that. Having said that, I mean, I am sympathetic towards capital punishment for certain crimes. So one that I always think is absolutely ludicrous is can you remember Andreas Breivik, the Norwegian, who committed a mass
Yeah.
slaughtered, I can't remember now, 70, 80 people? And his sentence is, I don't know, 30 years in a kind of a hotel. And that's just ridiculous. And I would base, if I'm on the border. I'm on the sitting on the fence with respect to capital punishment. And I would give this argument. Because life is so precious, the most serious punishment ought to be meted out for those who violate that sanctity. So it actually lines up with how we treat life in general. As you mentioned, the principle of the sanctity of life.
Gotcha.
I think that's a good point to make.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, David, what's your take on capital punishment in the U.S.? You still have the death penalty in some states.
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's a reason for it. I mean, we forget when we talk about this debate often is justice, right?
Mhm.
What is the justice at this point? Is it putting somebody in a hotel for 30 years, like Marvin was saying, or is it something deeper? Is there something that is that needs to be met out when someone is violated in that sense? There's a victim that loses their life, and it's heinous, you know. And there's crime, a certain crime that is just heinous. And I think that first degree murder, that type of first degree murder, should be met with uh, that capital crime. So A, that person can't do it again, whether they do it to somebody in jail or whether they are set free at some point thinking that they've been rehabilitated. No, I mean, there is a notion of justice that is out there that I think needs to be considered, and I do believe in capital punishment for certain crimes, and I think that that's the big thing. I mean, when we look at abortion, we're talking about an innocent human child that has never committed a crime. When you're looking at a criminal, they've committed a crime. They forfeited their rights because they've committed a heinous crime. So I think that that has to be taken into consideration when we try to confuse those in a debate. Well, you believe in capital punishment, but you don't agree with abortion. Well, of course, a baby's innocent. A human being that has done no harm, no violation. It's just in its stage of development. It's in a stage of development where it hasn't committed any crime. You know, that's the biggest factor. Somebody that is on death row has committed a crime, and unfortunately, we don't have infallible systems of justice. So it does have a cause for concern about executing somebody that was innocent. You can't take that back, and that does happen, and it's unfortunate. And but what is the best route? What is the best route, and how best do we go about it? Do we have a system of law where we can present evidence and present things that will give you beyond a reasonable doubt? And I think there's that judiciary process is precious, so it's a good system. It's not perfect, but yes, I think that when somebody does commit a capital crime, they get a capital sentence.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I suppose in capital punishment also is a deterrent, or supposed to be a deterrent as well.
All right. Okay. So one last question. It's going to sound a bit weird, and I'm not sure where Marvin stands on this. So it might be relevant, but um, okay. So when we're talking about the sanctity of life and the taking of a life, believe it or not, my thoughts actually went to hell, for example, and the justification for hell if not something like annihilationism is true. So if bodily or earthly life is very important, uh, how much more so is existence itself? And wouldn't it, if God is kind of, if annihilationism is true, and I don't know if Marvin believes that or not. I know me and David don't, but if annihilationism is true and it's imposed by God, is hypothetically even worse. He's extinguishing the existence of a person, not just taking their life. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And the second aspect is, let's say it's possible that in hell, like Richard Swinburne goes for this, he thinks that, oh, internally, I can choose to annihilate myself. Isn't that akin to like suicide kind of thing, only much worse because you're annihilating your existence? So I know that's a weird question, but any thoughts on that? Like the taking yourself out of existence, Marvin? Or
Um, I'll let David answer that first because I'm trying to think about it a little bit. Is that okay, David?
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't hold to annihilationism. Um, I don't think you can annihilate yourself either. I think there could be something where, as the further the steam goes, or the further the smoke goes, forever and ever, that it dissipates, that consciousness breaks down, and that could be a form of annihilation of some sort. I don't know, but no, I don't think that God annihilates life, or existence in that requisite. There's a lot of things that go into this. Like, what is life at that point? What is life? What is existence? What is the effects of sin? Right? Because now we're talking theologically here. We've crossed the bounds of pure philosophy, and now we have to come up with a theodicy of some sort, of a theological response of some sort, and we have to examine what is sin. What does sin do to the image that you have stamped upon you? What does it do to your soul? What does it do to every part of your being? And I think that has to really be taken into consideration when talking about subjects like these. That's why I believe in hell, because I believe that um sin is so bad, it's so heinous to a holy God, that it does warrant an eternal punishment, and that is in degrees separation from God for eternity, and how that can drive human existence to what we call torment, which probably isn't the right word, is uh is justified because they have to be separated from God at that point. A, they don't want him. B, sin is the consequence of that. It's that heinous. And I don't think we have, in this day and age, we don't have a concept of sin that I think our earlier Christians and
Mhm.
earlier Jews had. We don't think of the severity of it, and what it can cause to the human consciousness, the human soul. So yeah, I would go that route. We'd have to have a theological response, and obviously I don't have one that's fully developed. Hopefully, after my thesis, I will. Uh, because that's part and parcel what I'm looking into as I write this thesis.
Yeah, I think you, David, it's a potential argument against annihilationism, right? Like presumably people like Chris Date and stuff would agree with you on like euthanasia or suicide. Well, you can make this equivalent in terms of annihilationism and the eradication of existence in hell, either externally by God or allowing for like the the spiritual equivalent of suicide by I choose to annihilate myself in hell. So there's a potential argument from the morality of it there. But yeah, Marvin, do you have any thoughts on it at this point? Or I
Well,
know
I would say that I I
are
think
you an annihilationist first of all?
well I am undecided
Okay,
on annihilationism and hell. Um, I'm still wrestling with that. I do think that annihilationalism is perhaps easier to make a theodicy out of than hell. So I take the opposite view from you. I think you think, correct me if I'm wrong, that annihilationism is the worst thing possible ethically for to happen to an individual. Is that correct?
yeah, I definitely see it as something bad, especially when it's yeah externally imposed like by God onto people.
Well, I would say that we both say that it's bad, right? But it wouldn't be externally imposed. It wouldn't, in my opinion, it would be imposed from the individual who decides to separate themselves from God.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All
But
right, cool. Yeah,
I would say, and since there is no person to suffer, I don't see an ethical problem there at all. I do see an ethical problem there amongst loved ones for a certain period of time. But yeah, I mean, if there's no person, there's no one to suffer.
gotcha. All right, cool. Well, I do want to move on because I know you have time straits and we're butting up against the hour. We have two questions left to ask. So, yeah, Mara, do you have maybe like another 15-20 minutes so I can?
Yes, sure, with pleasure.
Okay, awesome. All right, cool. So the next question is totally unrelated that Marvin
Mhm.
wanted me to ask you guys. So the first, it's let's start with this one. So, should Christians be concerned with environmental activism? Yeah, we'll start with you, Marvin, since I was just talking to you. So,
For sure, we are called to be stewards of the earth, right? God said that we should take control of the earth, uh, make it. He makes it productive, but we partake in that through good stewardship. So, absolutely, um, Christians should be involved with environmentalism from a Christian perspective. Right, I'm not. We have something called Extinction Rebellion in the UK. Do you have that?
no, I haven't heard of.
Oh, it's sort of militant activists disrupting
Oh
public
yeah,
services. Yeah,
yeah, we definitely have that. Dundas Square. I want to strangle these people. So,
yeah. Most, a lot of people do. So when I talk about Christian environmentalism, I'm talking about just being good stewards, which means having an ethical orientation towards God's creation.
gotcha. All right, David, what's your take? Should Christians be concerned with or get involved in environmental activism?
Depends on what you mean by activism, right? I think as a community of human beings that are trying to preserve the planet and be good stewards, like Marvin proposed, we need to work communally with our brothers and sisters and our fellow humans to make this world and maintain this world and to consider it precious. It's a gift. We have to do things. The thing is, when you talk about activism, and I say, what do you mean by that? Is there's activism where the community gets together and tries to affect change, but then there's activism that goes too far, and you start sending anthrax to people in the mail. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, you can't go to
They'll
a
stop the
free
package
range.
in the mail to you.
Yeah, I am really against some commercial farming that um, puts animals in a I mean, oh, it's just disgusting sometimes. Chickens in a warehouse that, they can't even see the ones that are dead, all because they want a billion eggs. It's just
Yeah.
there's ways to go about it, and then there's ways not to go about it. And I think the whole idea of free ranged um, um, farming is probably the better route. Um, Horticulture is really great. Things like that, the way we do farming. So yeah, I think there's ways to do it that are good, and I think there's ways to do it bad, and I think there's ways to take care of the environment better and this and that. But I'm also not for you know the total elimination of fossil fuel. I think that uh, we need it in a certain ways to keep society productive, to increase our technology so we can get around the use of fossil fuel. So we need fossil fuel to get us out of fossil fuel, almost in a way. So we need, and that's very general. I'm not going into specifics, obviously. Um, I'm also not for the government body uh, doing it solely. You know, pressing upon individual companies with regulations that cripple it. Because it could be that very company without those regulations that discover a new technology that gets us away from those things. So there's a very fine balance that has to be uh, employed, and I think that it's going to take more than just politicians. It needs to take individuals that care and individuals that uh, um, have a passion to advance these things, and the companies have to be involved. The politicians have to be involved to an extent. Can't be thrusted just on their backs. That's the problem we have. Is we put it into the hands of the politicians alone, thinking they're going to take care of it, when it's actually going to be an entire uh, human effort. That's where I would go with it. So yes, we have to be involved with the environment, and we have to be involved in that in a capacity where we're actually doing some of the work.
Well, let me ask this then. So this is kind of a political thing, but it's kind of following up, right? Like how you guys are saying, look, we all have to come together. We all have to do our part, our fair share, whatever that is, appropriate to our thing, right? But some people, like in the West, right? Like people are saying, look, what this trans environmentalism, what it's translating into is that we have these crippling regulations or rules for us that are hurting our ability. Meanwhile, it's solving nothing in the grand scheme because you have nations like China, who's the vast majority of the pollution and the problems with the environment. Nothing is going to be solved by us doing stuff and them doing nothing. So, like some people might say, well, what's the point of us doing anything? We're just causing ourselves to have a worse life, and it's
Mhm.
doing nothing. So, like, what do you say to people of that sentiment?
To understand what the point is there, and it's a good point, but let's not forget that places like China are causing big problems for themselves and for others. So it's not like they're free from problems through industrialization. They have big problems, big pollution problems. Um, so I think we still have to take the lead because we're commanded to take the lead. Let me throw a scripture in there. Genesis, I will quote from Scott Ray's book. Genesis 2:15 says, it conveys a marvelous teaching. Here God expects Adam to serve in the garden and to keep it. Adam and his descendants are expected to meet the needs of the garden so that it will persist and flourish. God also expects us as Adam's descendants to keep the garden. This word, and garden is obviously, I'm equating with earth. This word keep is sometimes translated tend, take care of, guard, and look after. The Hebrew word upon which this translation of keep, the Hebrew words, upon which this translation of keep are based is the word shamar. And shamar indicates a loving, caring, sustaining kind of keeping. So if that's our command, I think we have the moral obligation to take positive action in our own spheres and try to influence others in spheres too.
Absolutely, I agree. We have to do that, and I think that also um, I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase this, but taking the lead, I think we have to lead, not just take the lead, but also lead by example. Which is part of taking that lead. But we're not also advocating going back to the dark ages, right? We're not going to suffer,
No.
So like we're going to find new ways. And you know what, maybe throwing a wrench into the system will help us and move us towards finding a new way. Because I can tell you one thing: when humanity gets into a point where they have to work and to get together to survive or do whatever, and I know that kind of gives it some negative connotations, but we excel. We excel, and we adapt, and we make new ways of doing things. We discover new things, and I think that that's when mankind's at its best. I mean, we went to the moon, because of it. So I just think that we're not gonna get to a point where we're suffering, but we're gonna get to a point where, yeah, we're gonna have to cut back, and sometimes less is good. And we're gonna have to move forward in some sort of capacity, finding new ways to do things, and that's not there's not a problem with that. Um, I think and I think we will. I think we can do that. I think we will at some point. I think I'm hoping that we're not that depraved, even though there's several generations that say that there are those that are depraved. I just hope that we win out in the end.
Sorry, David. Have you met Pine Creek Doug? No.
Oh gosh.
Sorry, man. All right,
I'll
cool.
also throw out that Sabbath command requiring rest for animals as well, such as Exodus 28 through to 11, Deuteronomy 5:12 through to 16, and the legal penalties for animal mistreatment. So God is calling us to not only look after the garden, but the animals in it as well. So we need to take that into consideration as well.
Awesome. I wasn't aware of that. That animals had a day of rest as well. I didn't know that. So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
Exodus 28 through to 11 and Deuteronomy 5:12 through to 16.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna check that out for sure. All right, cool. Well, we've got 10 minutes left, and the last issue that Marvin wants to deal with here is, look, how should Christians respond to transgender issues? These guys are in the news all the time these days.
Yeah, it's the hottest issue going at the moment. Not a day ago, the leader of the Scottish National Party, which is I think Scotland's largest national party, quit, and she said that the reason she quit was because of the pressures of being a politician. But I wouldn't be surprised if part of what influenced her was a stance she took on transgender issues that got her an absolute shellacking in England. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's something like the transgender bill. And what she has allowed, or what she was advocating, was for men who identify as women, to be placed in women's prisons. And there's a high-profile case at the moment in the UK where a convicted double rapist now identifies as a woman has been placed in a woman's prison. This guy's ex-wife or current wife, I don't know if she's ex, has just said, look, he's playing the system. So very hot on the news, and it can go wrong in instances like that. But I mean, if you ask, I mean, the bigger picture, another picture is, I do think that there are certain individuals who genuinely do suffer from dysphoria, and we need to treat those people as best we can. But on the whole, it seems to be a trend that has gathered momentum and has gotten out of hand.
Gotcha. David, yeah, what's your take on the transgenders?
Well, I mean, I want to say that there are several issues when it comes to that. And do you have one in mind when you talk about this? Because this is a wide range of issues that are
Well, it's
problematic
Marvin.
here.
Yeah, it's Marvin's question.
Well,
Like Marvin,
let me throw this one out. How do you feel about individuals' insistence on referring to that person with certain pronouns or with certain pronouns?
I think it's a case by case basis, right?
Mhm. I
Um,
do, yeah. I think it's case by
yeah,
case, which is
it's a
why it's
case
kind of
by yeah, and that's where I kind of come as a case by case basis, and it's not the fact that I'm doing it out of disrespect or anything like that. I
Mhm,
don't think that I'm going to um, placate your delusions because I think that's
mhm,
where a lot of that's coming from. You're not a person that is just um, demanding this because of the dysphoria or whatever you're going through. You're doing it because you have other motives, or you're doing it because you're part of a fad, or you're doing it because you're part of this trend that's going on. I think I'm not going to placate to your delusions or your insistence upon me changing myself and being intolerant of me because you think I'm intolerant of you, and it's not like that. I respect you as a human being, and we're just gonna have to disagree on some things, and you're just gonna have to square with the disagreement.
do
Um,
David, do you mind just clarifying? So, like, what do you mean then by case? Are there cases where you would use the false pronouns kind of thing? Like,
I like I said, it depends on the situation, you know, it depends on yeah, I would just say it depends on the situation. I can't think of one off the top of my head where, like I said, I'd placate it. But if someone is truly suffering from dysphoria and they're truly suffering in society, I'm not gonna use a pronoun that's gonna offend them. I want to reach out to them in love. So how am I going to do that? And I have to look at that situation and engage that situation to see where I can be more effective. So if part of the help that I'm giving them is to use a pronoun that may not trigger a negative response where then they just put up walls. And next thing you know, they're on the 10 o'clock news for running their car into a tree. I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to help them the best way I can. Um, but when I have guys on the street telling me I have to use they, them, and all that, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to placate to that delusion, and I'm not going to let it reach me in a societal level like that. I'm going to
do
take
you,
a stand.
do you and sorry for interrupting and asking the follow up, but last follow up, and I'll let you guys keep going. But
no, it's cool. It's
uh,
cool.
so okay, so with the person that we do placate, because again, it's the same question: do we tell a lie to prevent the death? And the situation you gave, yeah, I can see giving that lie is it's the lesser of two evils type thing. What about over the long term? Do we try to talk them out of their delusion event, like in a proper way at all, or do we just keep going with it? Like, What's our role?
Yeah, well, I mean, well, think about treatments, Dale. I mean, when you give somebody treatments, it's to help them get better. You're gonna have to gauge that situation to where, when that person comes out of that delusion, you're gonna you're gonna start using the correct terms because that's just grammar. You know what I mean? That's just the right thing to do. Um, so yeah, I mean, depends on the treatment, depends on the situation, like I said, and how you progress in a situation. I mean, you don't meet somebody where they're at and just leave them there. You meet them where they're at, and then you walk with them to the next place. Then you got to think. I know this is a hot button issue, and I just wanted to bring this into it when it comes to like accepting transgenderism into sports and into prisons and stuff like that. No, I do not think that men should be fighting women in UFC. No, that's wrong. There are definite biological differences that have to be taken into consideration, and sorry, that's biology. So yeah, like I said, there is a line here, and there's several issues that this could encompass that we would have to deal with. So yeah, I wouldn't be for that. So I also wouldn't be for putting a man in a female prison.
Yeah.
And I suppose you hit upon one of the issues there. I think when you talk about M to F, male to female, doing sports,
Oh.
is that males at puberty go through, and women go through hormonal changes that bring about secondary sexual characteristics, which include sort of deeper voice, broader shoulders, heavier bone density, um, and those kinds of things. When you're faced with them, and the person has gone through these sort of changes, and you're looking at them, you've got all these sort of biological clues telling you, in a sense, that they are of a certain sex, but there's their personal pressure and their societal pressure trying to tell you that now you've got to sort of refer to their gender as perceived by themselves. It's just a very difficult thing to do. What do you think, Dan?
I think it's nonsense. I think there are two genders.
Yeah, basically, if
I mean,
if
it's biological. You
if a
can't.
dude's got, if somebody's got 9 o'clock shadow, broad shoulders, it's just hard to not perceive them as a fella.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. We get to this point where it becomes ridiculous, and that's the type of stuff that I would be against. Is
Mhm.
um
Well,
the agenda and this pushing of uh, uh, transgender rights. The pushing of it is really bad, and trying to conform society by forcing it on them isn't the correct way to go about it. I think also it destroys what it means to be a woman.
I do, yeah.
let me throw
It
this.
destroys feminism,
So David,
because if a man can be a woman, then what is a feminist?
okay, so I'm gonna kind of, I have one last thing that interests me about this. So it's a twofold question for both of you guys, and then I'll let you guys finish off with whatever you want to talk about. But okay, number one, from a Christian perspective here, what explains transgenders? Like, what's wrong with them? Is it primarily a mental thing? Is it a spiritual problem? Or like from your Christian perspective, what do you think is what's the cause of it? And the
So you're
second,
going to get us into trouble.
Well, I'll go.
well,
I'm going to get death threats after this one.
I'll say
no, I mean before you answer that, because you guys both said it's clear that there is male and female. The second aspect I want you to also answer is, what do we make of like chromosomal hermaphrodites? Because that's something that I don't have an answer for. So yeah, Marvin, over to you.
I would just, which is why I gave the caveat at the beginning that there are genuine cases, right? So what I would say is, let me try to remember your question. Could you repeat the question? I've lost it.
So two questions.
Cheers.
Like, what is the cause? of transgender.
Okay, got it. So I think the causes are very often mental. I think that gets fed into, and I think that there's a spiritual aspect to the mental as well. And separate those out from the very few cases of real gender confusion. One example may be intersex people, right? In which people are born with both sets of genitalia, right? The parents may assign them a sex that person then later finds is incongruous with their identity as they perceive themselves. So there are instances in which there's genuine genetic ambiguity. I think in those cases that the person has the right to decide for themselves. But a lot of other cases, I think, are definitely psychological cases or
with
mental cases.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. A lot of what you said, I agree with. I would like to add more to it. Um, in the case of like intersex, there are people they go more towards one way or the other. I mean,
Mhm.
they naturally fall into that category, um, even though their parents may have messed up in the beginning, right? But they develop in that way, right?
Mhm.
Um, I don't know much about people that have both chromosomes. I don't even know if that's a thing. But I do know that as a Christian that is dealing with this issue, I do believe there is spiritual effects that cause temporal problems. So I'm going to give you the old pastoral example. It's sin, right? I think sin does corrupt the genome. I think that
For sure, for
I
sure.
think that there are effects upon that. I think there's also the effects of depravity onto the mental state. Um, so I think there's the theological answer is that sin has really, really done a number on us, right? And um, you know, whether it's the environment that you're in that gives you these feelings, whether it's the feelings that you just want to react on because you're deviant. I think that has a lot to do with it. And matter of fact, I think that's there's more of that than there is are exceptions to the rule, right? Um, there's more deviance and desire to want to just be over sensualized, over sexualized. There's this desire to want to pursue pleasure instead of principle. There's all these different variations, all these different aspects that we have to consider. Um, could be part of the problem, but as a theological problem, I think there is a definite connection between the spiritual realm and the temporal realm, this realm that we live in, this world we live in. And I think that sin bleeds over into that in many different ways, whether it's depravity and the mental states to actual physical changes that could occur, and the corruption to the genome that takes place. So yeah, there's a lot to it, and I think that all those have to be factored in. I do think there's a lot of problem with deviancy. Dude, I have issues with it myself. I love sex. I mean, I had a daughter out of wedlock, guys. I mean, um, I was very prone to um, intimacy. Very desired intimacy to an unhealthy level where it was almost it's like a drug in a way, and sex is like a drug. I mean, look at the people that watch pornography. It says that their mental state reacts like they're on cocaine, and it can change your mental state and give you permanent problems, that
Mhm.
you have to slowly overcome to get your brain back to the way it should be. um, there's something going on there in the metaphysical realm that we
Mhm.
have to acknowledge. And the fact that we don't, and we just try to pawn it off on philosophy alone or science alone, to me is detrimental to the progress of the human species. And I think that the human species would thrive better from their you know, getting to know Jesus better, you know, and getting to know God incarnate, and understanding the Christian worldview in a way that should be understood, and not in the way that religion have made it, you know. So it's relational, and you know, that has to also be taken into consideration in your theological worldview.
And I will interject here because I know the sort of the objections that atheist types make, and they'll just say, no, get as much sex as you can while you're young. And I would counter with this. You can do that, but it's ultimately unfulfilling. And it's actually very alienating. So the thing that you're doing is actually making you feel worse about yourself and about the world you live in. So, and I do understand that that's a subjective thing that I'm throwing out there, but I do think it's important.
But Marvin, I think you're onto something.
Yeah,
I really
and
do.
we're men. We've been
Look
there.
at look at yeah. Well, you know, look at Deion Sanders.
Yeah.
This has always stuck to my mind, and there's a reason for it. This man is in a bed after winning his second Super Bowl, and he's having trouble with suicide, and he's like, you know, why not end it all? Because I've done everything. I'm a millionaire. I have had women. I have done this, I've done that, and I've won the most important game to ever be played, the Super Bowl. You know, he felt like he had accomplished everything, and there lacked purpose.
Mm-hmm.
We know that lust doesn't fulfill; it just
Mm-hmm.
hungers for more.
Sure.
And shame is a real thing,
Yeah.
and there's a reason we feel it. Why? Because we are moral agents, and that comes with a worldview, and that worldview has to account for that. We try to like say, oh, there's a difference between naturalism and supernaturalism. Well, yes, to a degree, but there's also ways they're interconnected, and we have to acknowledge where they're interconnected and how they affect us, and things like shame, guilt, and all those things, how they affect us. There, you know, like I said, lust, it never satisfies.
Mm-hmm.
It asks for more, but love, in its four ways, satisfies.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
know, so we have to be a people of principle and not just feeling. We have to be able to balance that out. And yeah, so when it came to Deion Sanders, he met God, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what kept him going. You know, so we do the same. We're a species that needs our creator.
Right. Well said. Perfect. Cool. Well, I think that's it. It was a little over time, but I managed to fit in everything. Yeah, Marvin. Obviously, you're the special guest for this episode. Is there anything else that we haven't said yet that you want to say to the audience, or do you think we've kind of covered everything?
I'd just like to ask Yudo, what do you think the causes of gender dysphoria are?
Yeah. So I agree with you, Marvin. I think. Um, for certain people, definitely there's something mental going on.
Mm-hmm.
Just especially the activists, there's something not right about the way they act. Now, obviously, the primary cause is spiritual, going back to and spiritual corruption, and going back to David Russell. All of us are affected by sin
Mm-hmm.
in different ways, right? So David is no better than the transgender or someone engaging in homosexual sex. He engaged in heterosexual sex. That's just as much a sin. No one's better than the other, and we have to remember that. So, yeah, I
Right.
think fundamentally everything, including mental illnesses or physical diseases, everything is ultimately related to sin and that spiritual disease, how it corrupts every aspect of our human lives. So that's sort of my take. Yeah. Does that help? Or
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think we're on the same team in that sense. I think
awesome.
we're in agreement. We're in agreement. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
I would also for Christians, I would also recommend Mark Yarhouse's book, Understanding Gender Dysphoria. I think he's a Christian psychologist at Harvard. I'm not sure, but that's a good one. Understanding Gender Dysphoria. I can see if I can search it up. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'll send me a link and I'll put that in the blog for people as well to check out. But yeah,
Yeah, that was an excellent read.
Awesome. Yeah, I just want to
Has
say
this been real seeker enough for you, Dale?
it has. Yeah, I want to say thank you so much to Marvin and to David. You guys had a great conversation and made the show what it was. I'm not witty. I don't have the gift of gab. So without you two, the show would suck. So yeah, thank you both for coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, not a
Pleasure.
problem, buddy.
Awesome. All right, cool. So just for the audience, next week, David Russell already spilled the beans, you little bugger. But we're having a Shroud Wars, a debate between me and Jordan from Reason to Doubt. Jordan's an atheist and a Shroud skeptic. And we're going to be debating a couple issues, things like the Sudarium of Oviedo, as well as the carbon-14 dating in 1988. So hopefully that'll be a great show. But yeah, look forward to that. So have a great week and take care, everyone.